Welcome to Magdala. My name is Father Eamon Kelly. I am a priest serving here in the Holy Land for the last 17 years, a legionary of Christ for almost 50 years, thanks be to God. Originally from Ireland, and was blessed to serve in a number of different countries and continents, especially in North America and in Europe, and now for the last 17 years here. And behind me you have the Sea of Galilee, and behind that we see the Golan Heights, and then we have Syria. Now if we look to the south, here you can see at the end of the Golan Heights there's a ridge, and that ridge south of the city of Tiberias here is the present day state of Jordan, the royal kingdom of Jordan. And if we look to the north in the opposite direction, we actually have passed Mount Hermon over here behind Capernaum and the Mount of Beatitudes, the multiplication of the loaves memory. And then we look up here to the northwest, and if we can get in there with the camera, we can see a ridge of mountains behind the hill, behind the modern day city of Magdala, which really represents also the ancient Magdala. And that ridge of mountains is the boundary between Lebanon and Israel. And if you want another maybe sensational fact, looking again over the Mount of Beatitudes, we are closer to Damascus in Syria than we are to Jerusalem in terms of just plain simple geography. Now I'd like to invite you to walk through Magdala with me as we remember the horrible events which happened here almost 2 weeks ago, on the beautiful day of rest, the Shabbat, on a feast day celebrating the joy of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, of God's law. And we were shocked with the news of the horrible, brutal, atrocious attacks on people who were sleeping in their rooms, in their residences, with terrible brutality inflicted on elderly and also on babies. Kidnappings, murders, with extraordinary, further brutal expressions which most of the world is now familiar with through all the media coverage. 2 weeks ago today, 2 days before these attacks, this avenue would be filled with people. Many groups from all over the world coming here to visit the Sea of Galilee and the various holy sites around here. Capernaum, Bethsaida, the primacy of Peter, the multiplication of the loaves, the Mount of Beatitudes, driving up to Caesarea Philippi at the foot of Mount Hermon. And now it's completely empty. It was a terrible shock, and we were left speechless. And then dealing with the immediate fear of the pilgrims and helping them to find a prompt return home. Since their families were so concerned. And then as the days went by, there were growing consequences of war, further escalation of conflicts. And this was very hard on everybody. The shock part, the complete meltdown of all the pilgrimage, and all kinds of reflections happening. Our first actions were to help the pilgrims to leave, and also the volunteers, also in shock. First of all, they didn't really want to leave. And then we had a false alarm, a siren went off. We didn't realize it was a false alarm. And this helped people to wake up to the fact that the conflict was real here, because we can live very detached from conflict in the world. There are so many conflicts in the world, so sadly to say. Here we're at a town, this is a first century residential and work area here in Magdala, which we excavated over 10 years ago. And then the volunteers were more willing to leave. Some of them had just arrived to begin their time of volunteering, and that was very tough. Obviously, another major thrust was to enter into prayer more profoundly for peace, and we started to have extra hours of adoration each day. Before the Blessed Sacrament, with benediction every evening. I had many conversations with workers here and our staff. We are blessed to have a very, very beautiful staff in Magdala. Here there are Jewish people who work alongside Arab Israelis who speak Arabic, and some of them are Bedouin, some of them are Druze faith, and others are Muslim. Quite a few wonderful Muslim people working here in Magdala. Here we're in another area of excavation. This is a very prominent and important piece where we have ritual baths and a mosaic here that's very special, mosaic floor. But another day we will give you more detail. And over there in front of us we have our synagogue. We won't go there now, just so you can see. And the guest house that has been built. So it was very moving for me to have a chat with one dad who was, I'm sure, agnostic, if not atheist, and he has he's father of two boys, 11-year-old and almost 14-year-old. And one of his big concerns was how to help his boys filter all the news they were hearing. And I was deeply moved when he explained to me that he wanted his boys not to grow up with hatred. He wanted his boys to understand a little bit of the history of the world and the dignity of the human person. He didn't want them to lose their humanity. It's extraordinary. Also, our outreach through our live streams every day is very much to the people all around the world, and some cultures are very dependent on the media. And we know for many years in some countries where sometimes there were surveys showing that people were spending 4 hours in front of television on the average day. And now with the cell phones, it's even more intensified. And we know that a lot of the media needs sensation in order to drive its advertising revenues. And conflict is an ideal place for that, tragedy. And so the news cycle repeatedly brings the exact same facts many times an hour, and people lose their calm. They become deeply anxious. One of the conversations was with the dad who was a 3-year-old girl, and the conversation came around to the point when he would go home to pick up his girl in his arms. She needed to find her dad at peace. And so the thought to withdraw from the media a little bit, to refrain from constantly watching the latest updates, to have peace in our hearts, to become an island of adoration in our hearts, of prayer, of intercession, in order to have that place of peace where the Lord can radiate out into the world. The kingdom of God spreads through concrete people, much more than through beautiful buildings like this Duc and Altum into which we come now. So here we are in the boat altar of Duc and Altum, in a very special chapel. Maybe it's very appropriate for our times. We just walked beside another chapel where it's Jesus walking on the water in the storm on the sea, and Peter sinking in the water and Jesus pulling him out to safety. Another incident here, we remember when Jesus was teaching at the shore of the Sea of Galilee with so many people, he asked Peter to allow him to teach from his boat. And then Peter, who was so filled with sadness, with maybe we could say depression, he had failed fishing, and Jesus said, "Go out into the deep." Times of war and conflict are very difficult. They can bring out the worst in us, but also the best. People in times of conflict and war think of others in need, others who are wounded, families who are grieving in bereavement. To pray for people, to help people, to intercede that hatred won't succeed in the hearts of people. We remember great saints in times of conflict, Saint Maximilian Kolbe in the concentration camp, Saint Edith Stein, and so many others who were formed in the times of conflict. Maybe you have read the Screwtape Letters, and C.S. Lewis comments about how also times of war are times for the forging of great saints and holiness. And this is a message that's good for all of us, because from one day to another our entire pilgrimage intensity at Magdala in the Holy Land was finished. It was impressive to see that there were still pilgrims coming for almost a week, but it was declining every day very, very intense, very strongly. And then we realized, on what do we build our lives? So many of our workers had to go home. Then the guides didn't have work, the drivers, the people in the restaurants. So many people were losing their income. And we see all that hardship and we want to help. But then there are much greater hardships with the people who have lost family members, friends. I know 3 different people personally, relatively close. We meet a lot, we talk quite a bit, we work together, and each of them have lost a friend or a relative. Then the world is very fragile. And each of us at home have our own relationships in our families, with our friends, siblings, parents, children, neighbors. And maybe there are things we need to reconcile so that we can be sources of peace in the world. It's easy for us to label bad guys, to identify with good guys. But many times we have our own personal histories of conflicts that need to be revisited and resolved, reconciled. What a beautiful opportunity to do that. Our latest development that has just happened in the last, since the last 24 hours, but it was obviously some time in preparation. We just received well over 200 residents of a kibbutz that is within a mile of the Lebanese border, and there's relatively frequent shelling there, and the authorities want to evacuate a lot of the immediate border area. And so we have many people here now. The house is filled since yesterday evening with children to grandparents. Even some disabled people are here on wheelchairs, and it's a very different environment inside the guest house. So many people present, a lot of noise, children playing, going to the swimming pool, having a fun time, and the families are so relaxed. I think everybody experiences tension in these times, and maybe it can be suppressed or hidden, but then we need to find ways to confront it through prayer, through reflection, through encounter with each other, through helping each other. I invite you to continue praying, to develop reconciliation at home, to teach children how to see these things, to realize that there are many innocent victims, that we can't label an entire population because of the bad deeds of some, to be able to make good distinctions in order to help best and to inspire others to build up people for the future, for a good life. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and we turn to him in a broken world. He said, I give you peace, but not as the world gives you peace. It's a peace through humility, a peace through patience, a peace through education, through faith, through hope, through love. God bless you from Magdala here at the Sea of Galilee.